When I tell people I used to be lazy, they don't believe me. They think I'm being self deprecating. They can't square the person I am today, successful academic, with the kid who cleaned by stuffing everything under the bed, or the high school student who rarely attended math class and consequently had to repeat Algebra 2 the following year. So, how did I go from Shannon isn't living up to her full potential, common refrain in my parent teacher conferences, to an ambitious, inbox zero sort of person? People are also surprised to learn that I used to be shy. When I get up in front of an audience, I still surprise myself. Giving a talk like this is a far cry from the little girl who rarely raised her hand in class or the teenager who sat back and observed during social situations. I can't pinpoint any major milestone or event that set these changes in motion. Instead, I think adding a new behavior here and there slowly snowballed over time. In fact, I think I gradually shaped the traits I'd need to be successful in the life I wanted instead of letting my personality limit or dictate who I could become. And so, in addition to watching my own personality change over time, I'm also a clinical psychologist with over 15 years of experience helping people improve their lives. I've seen the power of personality change firsthand, and I love sharing these principles for meaningful self growth with other people. But let's back up a little bit. How many of you have taken a personality test? If we were in person, I would ask you all to show me, to let me see a show of hands. And if you're like me, you've consulted BuzzFeed and you know exactly which Taylor Swift song perfectly matches your vibe. I'm bejeweled, by the way. Or maybe you've read up on your zodiac sign to see if your personality is compatible with a new partner. And although it may seem obvious, the BuzzFeed quizzes and horoscopes are not scientific. Did you know that many of the personality tests used to guide educational and career choices are not supported by research? Despite being a $1 billion industry, commercial personality testing used by schools and corporations to funnel people into their ideal roles, they don't predict career success. Yes, even the Myers-Briggs, the most popular test that rakes in millions of dollars each year. Beyond their lack of scientific support, the most popular approaches to understanding personality are problematic because they assume that our traits are static. That is, you're stuck with the personality you're born with, and you might as well make the best of it. But modern personality science tells us that traits can and do change over time. So, what if, instead of letting these tests put you into a box personality wise, you imagined the life of your dreams and intentionally developed the traits that would help get you there? Once you've thought through the traits that would come in handy in moving you towards your personal and professional goals, you can use the science backed strategies that we'll talk about today to nudge your own personality in that direction. So, for instance, if you dream of owning your own clothing boutique someday, it would be helpful probably to be organized so that you can keep better track of your inventory. And science tells us that if you're not an organized person right now, you don't have to give up on that dream because you can cultivate the traits you'd need for success in this area. So, before we can really talk about changing or enhancing your personality, we have to be sure that we're on the same page about what personality actually is. And so, according to psychologists, your personality is your characteristic way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Are you a person who tends to think about situations in your life pessimistically, or are you more of a glass half full kind of person? Do you tend to get angry when somebody cuts you off in traffic, or are you more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt? Like maybe they're on their way to the hospital or something. Do you wait till the last minute to complete tasks, or are you the type of person who plans ahead? You can think about personality as the label that summarizes your responses to questions like these. And so, depending on your answers, you might be labeled as optimistic, empathetic, or dependable. Research suggests that all the labels we use to describe ourselves can be summarized into 5 overarching traits, creatively referred to as the Big Five. Psychologists as early as the 1930s literally pored over the dictionary and pulled out all the words that describe human nature. They then sorted them into categories with similar themes. So, for example, words like kind, thoughtful, friendly were grouped together. They found that thousands of words could be accounted for by 5 broad traits, which include our susceptibility to experience negative emotions or neuroticism, how easily we get along with other people, our agreeableness, the degree to which we're conscientious, that is, reliable and organized and achievement striving, our tendency to be high energy and sociable, also known as extroversion, and then finally, how open we are to new ideas and aesthetics. So, what's the optimal level of each trait? The level most associated with health, wealth, and happiness? That's $1 million question, right? It's kind of a trick question since the right level of each trait is based on each individual person's values and goals. So let's use agreeableness as our example trait. Consider the goal of being an elementary school teacher. Cultivating the traits of patience and empathy and caring are likely to lead to success in this role. Now, imagine the characteristics that would be important for the school's principal. Here, being more assertive and able to give hard feedback are going to be necessary. And I like this example because it illustrates how the traits we need to succeed can evolve over time as our goals change in our careers. Now, identifying the optimal level of each trait for you is all well and good, but what's the point if personality is static? Remember, we define personality as a person's characteristic way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And while it may seem hard to change personality, people change how they think about things, they change how they feel, they change how they behave all the time. If you start to think being on time shows other people that I respect them, and you feel pride when you arrive at brunch before your friends, and you engage in new behaviors that increase your timeliness, like getting up with an alarm, setting appointment reminders, you are embodying the characteristics of a reliable person. And if you maintain these changes to your thinking and your emotions and your behaviors over time, voila, you are reliable. Data confirms this idea. So, across the population, personality changes across one's lifespan. In other words, as they age, people tend to experience fewer negative emotions and more positive ones. They're more conscientious, and they tend to place greater emphasis on positive relationships. There's variability here, though. Some people change a lot, and other people hold pretty steady. My clinical trial research at the University of Kentucky shows that we can speed up the process of personality change by making intentional tweaks to our thinking and behavior using techniques drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy. These tweaks can lead to meaningful change in less than 20 weeks instead of 20 years. So at this point, you're probably asking, like, how do I do this, right? It all sounds too good to be true. Well, the good news is cognitive behavioral techniques are relatively simple, and you don't need to visit a therapist if that's not something you're into. The first component involves changing your thinking patterns. This is the cognitive piece. You have to become aware of your thoughts to determine whether they're keeping you stuck in a particular way of behaving. For example, if you're thinking to yourself, people are only looking out for themselves, you're likely to behave defensively around others. Now, the behavioral component of CBT involves becoming aware of your current action tendencies and testing out new responses. So, if you're defensive around other people, they'll probably respond negatively to you, withdrawing, snapping at you, only confirming your belief that other people can't be trusted. By contrast, if you try behaving a bit more openly, maybe you share with a coworker that you're struggling with a task, you have the opportunity to see if that changes the way people respond to you. These cognitive behavioral strategies are so effective for nudging personality because, again, personality is literally your characteristic way of thinking and behaving. And consistently making changes to your perspective and your actions can lead to lasting habits that ultimately result in crafting the personality you desire. In my own life, starting small ignited my journey from messy and lazy to off the charts in conscientiousness. Now, I already mentioned that I wasn't a strong student growing up, and that definitely carried over into early college. My freshman year, unclear on what I was doing with my life, I decided by chance to take an introduction to psychology course. And despite the 8 a.m. start time, I managed to get myself up and out of bed and to every course meeting. I was rewarded by performing very well on the first exam, so much so that the teaching assistant said, Shannon, you should really consider majoring in psychology. And so I continued to work hard and perform well in the class. I had a reputation to uphold. And that affected, again, how I thought about myself. I'm good at psychology, leading to continued effort in the rest of my psych classes. Now, I must mention that these newfound study skills were very narrowly applied to my psychology courses, and that I continued to sporadically attend my other requirements, like 2 semesters of foreign language, intro to bio, resulting in haphazard performance. By my junior year, I was really feeling myself as a budding psychologist, and I decided I wanted to graduate and get my PhD. Now, no one was more surprised than me. We literally had a psychologist come to my high school to talk about her path. And I remember thinking to myself, no way, it's way too much school. But I was becoming more conscientious. Now, I worked up the nerve to tell a trusted professor about this newfound ambition and was pretty demoralized when she told me that she didn't think I'd get into graduate school because of my overall GPA. Negative emotional states can be a really powerful motivator. The innate purpose of guilt is to prompt behavior change so you don't make the same mistakes over and over again. And so, driven to reduce these negative feelings, I began to apply myself more consistently across all of my classes. When I finally did get into graduate school, the demands increased exponentially. Feeling overwhelmed, I did what anyone would do. I went to Target and I bought my very first day planner. Now, this marked the beginning of a beautiful relationship because I now get these things customized and monogrammed every year. Being able to write down all my appointments, all my assignments, all my client sessions led to palpable relief from my overwhelm. Now, anyone who's gone to graduate school knows that rewards can be few and far between. For me, as a first generation college student who didn't even know what grad school was 5 years earlier, seeing my name in print at the top of a published article was a powerful signal to keep going. In fact, I liked it so much, I've now done it over 100 times. So, fast forward to my early years as a professor. For the first time, I was acutely aware that people were counting on me for their own professional success. And so, the faster I responded to emails or provided edits on their research, the better prepared my students were for success in their own careers. And so I started to see myself through their eyes as someone who's competent and organized and productive, which further motivated me to live up to those standards. Years later, after I had my daughters, I learned the hard way that if you don't book summer camp early, they'll fill up. One season without reliable childcare was enough to learn that it is pretty hard to concentrate on my Zoom meeting while my girls are simultaneously putting on a unicorn DJ dance party in the same room. Now, that was not a mistake I was going to make twice, so I now set a calendar reminder literally 8 months in advance to sign them up for camp. So, what if I had just assumed I'd always be lazy and messy and unmotivated? The moral of the story here is let your dreams dictate the traits you develop rather than letting a personality test limit who you can become. Don't let a personality test or I'm just like this put you into a box. Now, you can't ask Google Maps for a route to, I don't know, New Jersey if you don't have a starting address to put into the system. And so the same is true with personality change. Before you can make a plan to nudge your traits, you have to know where you're starting. And so my science supported Big Five personality test, personality compass, is linked here at this QR code. And I'll also provide access to it in the handouts so you can revisit it after this workshop. But I'm going to go ahead and just give you a second or two to take out your phone and grab this QR code. Once you've taken the personality test, it's time to take a closer look at how your traits, as they currently are, align with goals that are important to you. So, we can kind of walk through what this process looks like with an example of my own. So, for a while, I thought I wanted to move into university leadership. And I realized that my level of agreeableness, which is generally really friendly, except in cases of, speaking out against injustice, was maybe not compatible with being chosen for a job like that. Um, Whenever something that I thought was unfair or unjust would happen, I would run my mouth in faculty meetings. And you can imagine that that does not make you super popular with leadership and doesn't make it likely that you yourself will move up into these echelons where you might be able to make some change. Now, by contrast, I have a friend, a really close colleague, who I've seen navigate these challenges a lot more successfully than me. She is able to keep her mouth shut in faculty meetings and able to broach some of these difficult conversations in a much more productive way. And so, if I were to look at how she's approaching the same goal, I might decide that I need to increase my tact, increase my diplomacy, right? These are traits that I can develop rather than just kind of foreclose on the idea that I'm not leadership material. And so you can do the same thing. You can start to interrogate whether the traits that you are currently embodying, if they serve you on your journey, or if you might want to nudge them in one direction or another. And so start to think about what additional characteristics would bring you closer to your goals, right? What are your personal goals? What are your professional goals? And what kind of characteristics will take you closer? The next step is to start to define what those traits that maybe aren't serving you on your journey, what they look like in terms of your behavior. How do they manifest, right? So for me, my lower agreeableness or my sense of fairness, I guess, are associated with kind of rashly speaking up before I've thought about a tactful way to approach my colleagues, firing off an email before I've really thought it through or let it sit for a day. And so once you kind of have some of that in mind, you can start to think about actions that you can take that are more consistent with the traits that you'd like to develop, right? So for me, it could be, mandatory 1 day waiting period on responding to any emotions or responding to any emails that, really irritate me or make me angry. It could look like keeping my mouth closed in meetings in front of a lot of people, taking time to think about what I'm going to say, and making an appointment to talk to my chair in my department. It could look like approaching people with solutions instead of pointing out problems. And so you can start to think about what that might look like for you, right? If you want to move ahead in your career and move into like a leadership role too, maybe that involves some public speaking, but that makes you really nervous, right? It brings up a lot of anxiety for you. Maybe it looks like speaking up more in meetings. Maybe it looks like offering to lead a meeting. Maybe, you kind of work your way up to the idea of traveling and engaging in public speaking in that role. And so the moral of the story here is that if you act like the person you want to be, you are the person you want to be. And so think about these questions on our personality questionnaires, right? They're asking you your characteristic way of behaving and thinking, right? And so if you are changing the way you're responding, right? If I start holding my tongue more and being more diplomatic in terms of my behavior, that's going to change how I fill in the little bubbles on the personality test, right? And so it's an example of how changing our behavior ultimately over time, if we maintain it, results in changing our personalities. All right. So, the next order of business in terms of our cognitive behavioral skills is to challenge our patterns of thinking, right? To consider if there are self limiting beliefs that keep you stuck behaving in line with a particular trait, right? So, if I see myself as the type of person who needs the adrenaline of the last minute to start studying or start working on a project or packing before a move, I'm going to be more likely to wait until the last minute, wait until the night before. However, if I see myself as a competent go getter that other people are counting on, I might at least try to get things done early. And so cognitive strategies can help us break down these rigid thinking patterns, right? Instead, you might tell yourself, I don't literally need adrenaline to open a book to start studying, right? There's nothing actually stopping me from doing a little bit each day. And so a small shift in perspective can be enough to try out a new behavior. And if that behavior is reinforced, you're likely to continue in the future. And so you can see here how we think about ourselves, our identity informs our behaviors, right? And our behaviors and changing our behaviors, acting in line with the traits we want to have, that's what nudges our personality, right? And so if you're behaving differently, you're likely to see yourself differently too over time. And so, here again, identity is the key. How you see yourself can really limit or support your ability to step outside that personality box. And so, finally, let's talk a little bit about how we keep track of reinforcement learning in the personality change game. Reinforcement, as we've discussed, is an important psychological principle that ensures that the changes you make stick. So, reinforcement refers to rewarding experiences that follow our behaviors. That's right, increasing the likelihood that those behaviors will be repeated in the future. So, this is your little Psych 101 refresher. And so, reinforcement can look like adding something pleasant, like for me, having an article accepted for publication, or feeling pride, seeing my hard work pay off. It can also look like removing something negative, right? So, how planning ahead for summer camp takes away the stress of worrying about childcare. And so you can apply those principles or kind of use those principles to help you maintain some of the gains that you're making in terms of your personality change. Use it as a way to help snowball the progress that you're making. And so when you do change your behavior, right, when I make a meeting to meet one-on-one with my chair instead of airing my gripes in front of everybody in a faculty meeting, what happened? Did I get a different outcome from what I usually get? And how did the environment, in this case, the environment is my chair, my department, right? The vibes, like how did that respond to me? And so if it was positive, right? Like I could say, well, I got the outcome I wanted. I was able to kind of calmly describe why I felt like some changes needed to be made. And she was able to see that more clearly, right? Without having to be defensive because I'm like, adding her in a more public space. And so then you can ask yourself, what did I learn from trying out a new behavior? right? Well, that I can do it, right? That I can inhibit those comments, right? That I can be proactively assertive. And that maybe changes a little bit, right? Nudges a little bit how I see myself. It's going to make me more likely, if I see myself as a person who's diplomatic, it's going to make me more likely to try to behave that way in the future. And so the take home point here is to really pay attention to even the smallest win to reinforce the changes that you're making and keep you moving forward. And so I want to make sure that you all have access to these kind of worksheet questions that I've been kind of modeling in this presentation. And so I'll give you a second here again to grab this QR code, just take a photo of it right now, and you should be able to access it later, the website, and it'll bring up for you a PDF, a fillable form. So you'll be able to actually take the results from the personality test you took earlier or that you'll take after this, start to think about your traits, which ones are serving you, which ones could use a little bit of a makeover, listing your behaviors that you want to try out, the self-limiting beliefs that are keeping you stuck and what you could tell yourself instead, and then a place to record your wins, right? So that you are reinforcing that hard work. And so in sum, let's just go over our principles of personality change here. The first order of business is to identify an important goal and the personality traits that would help get you there. So I want to take a second too to talk about what's the optimal trait, right? We already talked about how there really isn't an optimal trait, and there's value at all levels of the traits on the 5-factor model. So for instance, if you're an introverted person and you don't have any desire for leadership or public speaking, and it's not because you're anxious about it, it's just that doesn't light you up, then there's absolutely no need or reason for you to push yourself in this way, right? And that's where the goal setting at the beginning is pretty important, because we're not telling you there's something wrong with your personality and you should change it to be at a certain level. It's identifying what is the right level for you and your goals. Now, once you've identified the goal and the personality traits that would come in handy, another hint to this is to think about people that are successful in moving towards those goals. They're moving towards the goals that you've laid out, and kind of going backwards from there. What are some of their traits that you really admire that you could try to embody, right? And then move the magnifying glass back to yourself, right? Noticing any patterns of behaviors that don't align with the traits you want to cultivate. Notice any self-limiting beliefs that are keeping you stuck behaving this way. And then challenging yourself to try different thinking and different behavioral patterns. And then finally, really paying attention to what changes when you do, right? How do people respond to you differently? Are there different patterns of success for you? These reinforcers are what are going to keep you motivated. And then finally, I just want to thank you all for taking some time to be with me today. I'd love to keep in touch. If you, obviously this is pre-recorded, so if you are watching this video, I'd love for you to reach out to me on Instagram or X, or shoot me an email at ssz@personalitycompass.com. Thank you so much for your time.